Hey, thanks everyone for joining. So tonight we're doing a bit of a talk in the world of product design and UX, and we have Liz here who's going to talk a bit about kind of the world of user experience in healthcare and so forth. But yeah, fortunately for you guys, I'm not going to hog the discussion and the introduction. So I'm going to hand over to Liesel, who's going to do a much better job than I in terms of just kind of quickly touching on what is FETSA or what are these talks. And I'm happy for her to also introduce Liz. So yeah, over to you, Liesel.
Cool, thanks, Skulk. Okay, let me quickly start with FETSA. I don't know if the people on the call have seen our new branding and our new name, which is not so new. So FETSA used to be Front-End Development South Africa, but we've decided to repurpose the name and call it Front-End Engineering and Design South Africa. Our meetup and LinkedIn and Discord and everything else has been rebranded. We're absolutely in love with it. The FETSA group now has sort of 4 parts to it. There's beginner support. We've got mental health in tech, product design, and then front-end engineering as kind of subgroups to the collective of FETSA. At this point, we've got 2 sponsors. One company is called io.co.za. The other one, nml.co.za. IO is essentially a company that does product design for startups, some innovation and also custom development. And then NML is a specialist financial services software development company. We are looking for more sponsors. We are actively working on it. So we'll send out some more communication about that soon. But in the interim, if there is anybody on the stream today and you're interested in getting involved for sponsorship, Joshua, the email here at the bottom of the screen at fetsa.org. You can contact him and he'll direct you to the right person. And then our talk for today, Designing for the Humans in Healthcare. Thank you, Liz, so much for doing the talk for us. Yeah, I'm gonna ask for assistance from Skulk to introduce Liz. He knows her a little bit better than me. But yeah, Liz's LinkedIn is at the bottom here. It's basically Lizette-Spangenberg for LinkedIn. And then Liz, I think you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a follow-up at a TEDx talk that you've done, similar. And yeah, anybody else wants to join me on that?
I guess that was your
cue.
That was my cue. All right. Yeah, like this is a bit of a curveball for me as well. I didn't anticipate I'd need to introduce Liz, but yeah, like I think like I can't even really say where I really met Liz or where kind of we first started interacting, but we kind of move in a lot of the same spaces in terms of kind of education and design and kind of like specifically the interaction, like the interfaces where design meets other fields, so whether that be software and so forth. So yeah, we tend to cross paths quite a bit. Also, I think we tend to comment a bit on one another's stuff on LinkedIn and so forth. Yeah, and I think Liz, I finally met you for the first time, I think last year at DevConf, quickly in passing in person. So yeah, I think that's about it. Like Liz is she used to head up DVT, the design there, and yeah, she's kind of someone that I really kind of look to in terms of like kind of general design ideas and kind of like almost a deeper, what would be the word, a deeper thinking about design and the role of design and so forth at a broader scale, which is always something that I really appreciate. Also kind of having a bit of an academic background myself. So yeah, hopefully you're gonna deliver on that. I actually haven't seen your TED talk, so we'll see how this goes. But you know, if it's good enough for TED, it's good enough for FETSA. Yeah, but I'll let you do the rest of the introduction, Liz. Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much for the introduction, both of you. So, like Skulk said, this talk is a slightly longer version of the TED talk that I gave last year in December. It's based in part on my PhD that I completed last year from Tux. And I looked at how human-centered design can be used to improve healthcare spaces. It's something that I'm very passionate about and something that I now work in as my day job. And something that I'm very excited to see is becoming more prominent in South Africa is actually looking at how we design interactions, not just for patients, but also for healthcare providers. So to start us off with, imagine that you're going to the doctor's office and you get there perfectly on time. And the receptionist tells you to take a seat, doctor will be right with you. And so you go and you sit and you take a seat and you wait. And you look at your watch as your appointment time comes and goes, and you're still waiting. Sound familiar to anyone? But the question is, have you ever stopped to think why the doctor might be running late? Maybe the doctor ran to the emergency room and had to help a patient who was just in a car crash. Maybe the doctor's going through a divorce and they needed a moment in the kitchen to just take a moment and compose themselves before they go and see their patients. Maybe their kid is sick and they're having a really rough day, or a million other things. Have you ever stopped to think that doctors are also just people with frustrations and issues and life that happens outside of their consulting room? So I want to introduce you to my family tree. My brother is a radiologist. My father is a general surgeon, and my mother ran his practice for 40 years until they retired in 2019. My one grandfather was a radiologist, my grandmother a nurse, and my other grandfather was the superintendent of a hospital and a general practitioner. I have numerous aunts, uncles, and cousins who are physios, nurses, dentists, and anything in between healthcare related that you can think about. And then there's me. I'm a designer. I fell a little bit on the wayside of the family profession. So I grew up surrounded by all these healthcare professionals, and I saw firsthand the insane hours that they work and the toll that their jobs take on them, both physically and emotionally. It's many times as a kid, my dad would come in at 2, 3 in the morning after an operation, tuck me into bed, go to sleep, and get called out again a few hours later. He never once complained about it because he really loved his job and he loved being able to help people. Even now, while being retired, he still often assists with surgeries. So last year, June, I went for a CT scan. And while looking at the specific thing they were asked, the radiologist found something they weren't asked to look at, an incidental finding. He found it because it's his job to not just look at the one specific thing that he was asked, but to treat the patient holistically. And as far as the boundaries of the scan extends, he's going to report, or she is going to report on what they see in that scan. So they found nodules in my thyroid. And after a sonar to confirm, 3 of these nodules were deemed as concerning enough that they had to be removed. Because I had a biopsy as well, they couldn't confirm what it was. They didn't know if these cells were malignant or not. So why am I sharing my medical information with you? Because incidental findings like these are the perfect example of a radiologist having the time and the space to actually perform their job function to the best of their ability, to thoroughly investigate a scan with uninterrupted focus. So, time to let you in on a little secret, which I already mentioned at the beginning. I'm not just a designer, I'm a healthcare solutions designer and a researcher with a PhD in design. So, turns out I'm in the family business after all. In my research, some of the things that I found were some of the biggest recurring themes were time to focus and the ability to focus and respect were two of the things that keep very busy doctors even busier. So through empathetic, human-centered design, I was able to create interventions that improve radiologists' working environments. But before we get to that, I want to take a step back. And this is the part where I go completely left field of what I spoke about at the TED Talk. Because at the TED Talk, I focused a lot on the solutions that I created. But this being a design forum, I want to take a step back and look at how I actually got to that, the framework that I created in order to get to this solution. Because I feel like as designers, it's very easy to say, ooh, that's a pretty solution. But what we really care about is how we got there. What research actually led to that? And what process did we follow to get there? Now, I started by looking at a lot of the traditional, well-known design processes, and I'm sure you'll recognize most of these. Top left, we have the design thinking structure from Stanford E-School. We have the IBM design loop. We have the ISO standard. We have the design council's double diamond, different versions of it. We have Google's design thinking on there, etc., etc. So these are all different ways of approaching things, and most of them follow similar kinds of steps. So I also did a whole analysis on this in terms of, where does research start? Where does ideation start? Where do we actually loop back? And it's very interesting to see the similarities as well as the differences between all these different frameworks. And there's a lot of value that we can learn from all of these. Bottom right is a designer called Kees Dorst. He is Dutch, brilliant man. He underpins a lot of my research. If you ever have the time, go and read his book, Frame Innovation. They do some really interesting work, and it helped me to think about the way that we structure design a little bit differently. So next, let me show you, this is the design framework that I came up with. So this was structured specifically for healthcare design in a South African context. So you see it still utilizes the diverging and converging method of the design double diamond process, where sometimes you think big and you create lots and lots of ideas, and then other times you stop and actually critically analyze those, and then you converge again. Sorry, lift my hands up, converge again to where you actually define things. And there are different processes in this. So I broke it up into different steps. And what you'll notice with all of these design frameworks is they're so pretty, right? They're also neatly structured, and they follow from step 1 to step 2. And luckily, we all know design is perfectly linear and nothing ever interrupts that or changes it, right? And I hope all of you are laughing, because that was obviously very sarcastic, because real life design does not look like that. Real life design is not that neat. It's not that nicely linear. So I actually sat and mapped out my real design process when I finished my thesis. This is actually what my design process ended up looking like. So if you break up the different steps, and some of these were functional restrictions. For instance, because I was interviewing doctors and my research was happening between 2019 and 2022, this was in the middle of COVID. So it took me about a year and a half to actually interview the radiologists that I needed to. So the interviews and the data gathering only came later, but a lot of the steps I could complete earlier. So one of the big things I just want to highlight about this framework that I created, something that tends to be missing from almost every framework that I've found, is step 1, which is that lead in. And it's actually looking at the person doing this process. I don't know about you, but in my case, I have very specific experiences, and just the way I was brought up and the environment that I grew up in all of these are inherent biases that we can't help, and it's the culture you grow up in, all of these things. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does influence the way that you approach things. And for that reason, you'll see there's a very specifically, the first step is describing the problem solver. Now, there's a whole analysis matrix which is mapped out that you can actually go and see what level of problem solver are you. Lots of other steps as well, but it's important to first just acknowledge who is the person doing this research. So if you start a design process, if you start a development project, if you start feature development, whatever it might be, the first step is to actually look, who is my team, who is doing this? Is this someone who has zero experience in the matter? Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it means that they have bigger hurdles to overcome in order to understand the subject matter and therefore the people that they're interviewing. So very important to first think, but who am I as a person? And you don't need to get all philosophical with this, but just what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Who can I add to the team to potentially help me overcome these things? So like I said, I mapped out this whole process. I literally wrote a 200-page thesis about it. So if you're ever bored, go and read it. I am trying to break it up into smaller chunks and get those published, and I'll send those out. So follow me on LinkedIn and you'll get updates on that. But to get to the actual research, I interviewed 9 different radiology registrars and radiologists, so people who are busy specializing to become radiologists. They're already qualified doctors, but they're doing their master's in radiology. This is an affinity mapping exercise that I did after the interviews. And as you can see, I started grouping all the information together. I love affinity mapping. It gives you so much insights into where these different areas lie that you then can grab insights from and use that to actually take it into your design process. So you'll notice just a bit of a zoom in on one of the sections. This is something completely unexpected that I found is one of the biggest frustrations, and I'll expand on this in a bit, is distractions. The fact that the department's phone is always ringing. Almost every single person mentioned this. And this ties back again to having very specific ideas sometimes before you go into a project. You might think that, oh, we're going to create a digital solution because we work in a digital space for the most part. And you think that, okay, we're going to come up with an amazing app or an amazing website. But how exactly do you use an app to make the phone ring less? I'll show you what I think could work. But we need to think about the fact that not everything can or should necessarily be solved by digital solutions. And what can those other interventions be then as well? So to get into the insights that I got from our research, I'd like to introduce you to Sia. Sia is a composite character that I created from the different registrars and radiologists that I interviewed. All of the stories and the anecdotes that I'm sharing come from real people. So Sia is 30 years old. She's married. She has 2 kids who love it when mom reads bedtime stories to them using funny voices. She's a 4th-year radiology registrar, which means that she's a registered medical doctor who's busy specializing to become a radiologist. She works at a public teaching hospital with 8 other radiology registrars who range from 1st to 5th year. While working full-time, she's also a busy mom, and she needs to stay on top of her studies, like writing exams, preparing seminars, and also working full-time. She's extremely busy. So my research uncovered 3 main themes. The first one is frustrations from interruptions and distractions. So remember Sia? Her 2 biggest frustrations are phone calls on the department's landline and other doctors walking into the department with questions. She wishes that she could lock the door and smash the phone against the wall. That's how much it frustrates her. Interruptions break her train of thought and can cause reporting to take longer, and it makes her worried that she might have missed incidental findings, like my thyroid nodules. She once counted 13 interruptions in the space of 30 minutes. That's one interruption every 2 minutes. She equates it to walking into the surgery while the surgeon is busy, taking them outside to the ward and making them go look at a different patient. You're completely removing that person from their context and completely breaking their train of thought, and yet the other doctors don't necessarily see it that way. So according to one study, even just one phone call during the hour before a report is written can make registrars 12% more likely to make a mistake while reporting. And if you think about the way that X-rays, CT scans, MRIs are used, this can sometimes be a life-threatening change between picking up on something or missing something or misdiagnosing something. Which leads us into our next theme. Radiologists often feel that they're not respected or understood. Sia feels that other departments look down on the radiology department and see no problem in interrupting the daily workings. My own grandfather, the radiologist, cautioned his sons about going into radiology because of the lack of respect that he felt at times. Now, feeling unappreciated or underappreciated is not a new phenomenon and not even unique to radiology for that matter. One study found that almost 2/3 of radiologists felt underappreciated by leadership in their hospital. There's also a strong correlation between feeling underappreciated and burnout. And the evidence shows that the majority of registrars experience burnout, and this number is steadily rising. Which brings us to our last theme, the importance of community to a registrar working environment. Sia believes that community and camaraderie are very important to a good working radiology environment. For Christmas, they decorate the department to make it feel more like home. They bring in tinsel and fairy lights and make the space feel like their own. But the big passion that binds all of them together, besides radiology, of course, is coffee. One time, the CT scanner broke, and someone said, well, at least it's not the coffee machine. Why am I telling you all these stories? Because this community of registrars are highly qualified specialists with big hearts. They care about what they're doing, but they're frustrated in a high-pressure, high-stakes environment. Simply put, they're running at full capacity. So I created possible solutions to these issues, interventions. We're going to follow Sia through an interaction where the solutions have already been implemented. Okay. So here we have Sia. She's busy investigating a scan when out of the corner of her eye, she notices someone walking past. But because of the new interventions, she feels relieved knowing that she's not going to be interrupted right at that moment. A few minutes later, a notification lights up on her cell phone. Again, she knows that she can ignore this right now. One of her colleagues would have gotten her attention if it was urgent. She continues her investigation and concludes her report. She checks the notification on her phone and sees it's from the self-help ticketing system. She sees that Dr. Salim is waiting for her. On the way there, the department's landline phone rings, and a first year acting as a physician liaison quickly answers. They deal with non-interpretive tasks as part of their workload, like answering the phone. She walks into the physician consultation room and takes Dr. Salim through the report that he requested. After the discussion, she walks back to her workstation, grateful that the physicians no longer interrupt her work and walk into her space. So next, we're going to look at the same scenario, but from the point of view of the visiting physician, Dr. Salim. He walks into the radiology department, past the registrars, not interrupting them, and follows the signs directing him to the new consultation room for physicians. He sees a tablet welcoming him to the radiology department and fills in the 4 simple questions. After submitting the form, he looks around and walks up to what can only be described as coffee shrine. He makes himself a fancy cappuccino while having a laugh at some of the coffee-related jokes against the wall. Next, a screensaver with QR codes grabs his attention, which he notices are the latest journal articles as they relate to radiology for different fields, like his surgery. So using his cell phone, he scans the QR code and sees a journal article for MRI staging for colorectal cancer. And he goes to sit down on the comfortable couch to read his article while he waits. 5 minutes later, Dr. Sia enters the room and calls him over to the radiology workstation to go through the report of the patient that he requested. Afterwards, as he's walking back to the surgery department, he thinks about how unexpectedly pleasant his experience in the new physician consultation room was. He makes a mental note to tell his colleagues the joke about the coffee cup that he saw. So these are just a few of the interventions that I created for this radiology working environment. There's a whole bunch more, but they tend to get a bit more abstract, such as teaching conflict resolution workshops between the different departments in the hospital, as well as including the radiologists in the daily rounds for the different departments, so that they can feel that they're actually part of the same team, as opposed to different teams that sit at opposite sides of the hospital. I've highlighted a few of these just to show the kind of impact that design can have when created from a place of empathy and understanding what people need from their space and in their environment, as opposed to just designing for their job functions. By implementing some of these human-centered ideas into the radiology department, Sia can now tuck her kids into bed at night, focusing on which voice to use for Mr. Fox, instead of worrying that she might have missed some incidental findings. And I was able to have complete thyroidectomy in December of last year, the day after my TED talk, funnily enough, which went very well, and there were no complications. Everything was completely benign, and that was because the radiologist who did my scan in the first place in July was able to pick up on things that he wasn't asked to, because he had the time and space to actually focus on the scan in front of him, and was able to do that uninterruptedly. Thank you very much. That is my talk. Any questions?
Thank you. It rings very true to me and what I do, because I come from an operational background. So thinking about how people interact and like how an environment can uplift productivity versus like how it can really like bring it down or not be conducive to what you need to achieve in that space is something I think about a lot. Don't know if you...
No, definitely. No, it's very true. And I think it's something that all of us realized to a large degree during COVID, because all of a sudden you were stuck at home. A lot of people didn't have home offices. So I remember at one point in around 2021, end of 2021, one of the biggest requests that we had at work was people were asking if they could go and fetch office chairs and bring them home to work with that, because they were sitting on their couches or sitting on bar stools and they were starting to have back problems. So, I mean, something as small as that can have a massive impact in terms of how you're working. And then in terms of, I mean, the doctors' workspaces, they deal with all sorts of very complex things every day that I think we can't even begin to imagine. I just had a small window into their daily working lives, and it was really fascinating. When I initially started the project, like I said, my brother's a radiologist. So my brother was telling me about some of the systems that they used while he was a student. And I went into this project thinking, oh, I'm going to design new radiology software, because somehow I thought I can revolutionize everything that, that giant companies like Fuji and General Electric are doing, I can do it somehow better. It turns out, after I spoke to the radiologists, they didn't have any frustrations, well, very, very few frustrations with the software compared to those main themes that I found. The biggest thing, being interrupted all the time. Some of the niggles that they had with the software were absolutely minuscule compared to the phone ringing or someone standing behind them looking over their shoulder waiting for them to finish. So we always know that you shouldn't go into a project with a solution already in mind, but I found it very funny that to an extent I did do that, and it was a nice wake-up call, and I'm like, yep, just reconfirming that what you think you're going to end up with is probably not what it's actually going to be.
It's interesting for me that you said that radiologists feel disrespected by. Did I understand correct? Like they feel disrespected by other doctors, in a way.
So a big part of it is they often feel that a patient comes into the emergency room and the treating physician will send them off to go and get an X-ray or a CT scan, and they feel like the doctor treats it the same as any other test. So like, oh, send him for blood work, send him for a urine test, and send him for an X-ray. But a urine test is a positive, negative. Yes, he has an infection. No, he doesn't. An X-ray isn't quite that simple. An X-ray, you need to sit and actually analyze. So you can't just say, I mean, sometimes, you can clearly see a broken bone. That's a different story. But if it's something a little bit more nuanced, the doctor might need 20 or 40 minutes to sit and look through it, look through different contrasts, actually do some research on what it is that they're seeing. No matter how experienced they are, they might need to go and look at other studies, compare it, whatever it might be. So it's not as simple as, a pathology result where you can say, yes, this person has this disease, or no, they don't. It takes a lot more interpretation. So they feel frustrated when they get rushed. And people are like, but why don't you have my report yet? Because it's not as simple as just saying yes or no. And sometimes there's different kinds of settings that you need to use on the machine for different kinds of scans. So you have very different settings if you're scanning for bones than when you're scanning for cartilage or for soft tissue or looking for fluid somewhere in the body. Those are all physically different settings on the machine that the radiographer has to set. So they have to do that, and then the doctor has to use the right interpretation. So there's lots of nuance, and they sometimes feel frustrated that other doctors don't understand that, like I said, it's not a simple yes or no answer. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And also, we need to go and do a bit of research before I can actually give you an answer. So they feel frustrated when they don't get that respect. Also because they tend to sit in front of computers looking at screens. And the doctors say, oh, but I'm looking at the patient and I've investigated them and I've checked the blood pressure, etc. You're just looking at a screen. Just give me an answer. But again, it's not as simple as that. They're sitting there looking at a screen, yes, but they're doing research and they're interpreting and they're thinking a lot. It's like playing 3D, 5D chess in a way. Quite a few of them likened it to, solving puzzles. And it's finding all the right pieces in the first place so that you can solve that puzzle.
My mom was a radiographer for many years, and she helped. She worked at Somerset West Vergelegen Medikliniek, but they ended up building like a whole bunch of practices under that umbrella. And so I kind of grew up with when they used to have like a dark room, and they were on call out. So I could sometimes go in when she developed the film, I could go into the dark room. To where the technology is today is mind baffling actually. But when you say like there's settings on the machines, and sometimes the patient has to go back because they basically took a photo of your skeleton and it maybe didn't come out right. Then the patient would have to go back for a better shot, or they see something and it's a different angle. It's quite a process and operation to run radiography practices.
Yeah, definitely. It's a highly technical exercise,
Highly technical.
and as you pointed out, you have the radiologists who are the ones interpreting the scans. But I didn't even mention about the radiographers now, but you have the radiographers who are the highly specialized technicians, or are the person that you actually interact with when you go for a scan. So they're the person who will position you on the table, tell you turn a little bit this way, hold still. They're the ones also getting all of the radiation exposure. So, they're the ones who are standing behind the lead wall, and they need to make sure that they're using all the right settings, and there's a whole lot of technical knowledge that goes into that as well. So it's a whole team effort to get all of that done. It's not as simple as taking a photo, yes, broken bone, go. Well, I guess sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not really that straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a question. There's one question here, Skulk, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I thought you wanted to say like Skulk, hold your horses. We have another question. I have a ton of questions. But yeah, let's get to this one first. So basically, from Nex, saying, generally speaking, do you find there's a demand for content designers, UX writers in the SA health tech landscape?
Definitely. I think in any kind of design landscape, I mean, there are very few health technology companies at this point in South Africa. There are, in words, there are more companies that are starting to grow, which is really great. But I definitely think it's a unique skill, because you need to understand the technical knowledge. You need to take laws and all the consent that you need to have from all different parties into consideration when you're surfacing different kinds of information. So yeah, I think content writers and UX writers, there's always a massive demand for. At this point in our company, I'm doing all of the UX writing. I am working very closely with pharmacists and doctors to make sure that I'm using the right technical knowledge, but then also trying to see how to make that language user-friendly so that patients actually understand what we're asking, because we're running into such interesting things with language. So we talk about healthcare and we talk about healthcare practitioners, but when you go to some of the more rural areas, we had someone who came back to us, someone who went to do a bit of research, and he came back and he's like, guys, we're going to have a problem. Like, what do you mean? He's like, so he's been speaking to the people in the township that he went to, and he asked them, how do you guys feel about healthcare? People are like, no, we're fine. We have clean drinking water. We're eating all our fruits and veggies. We're good. And he's like, oh, okay, but where do you go for your healthcare? Like, we go to the grocer where we get our fresh fruits and veggies. That's where we get our healthcare. What do you mean? And he realized, okay, there's a bit of a disconnect. So to the people he was talking to, healthcare meant a healthy lifestyle. So access to clean drinking water, sanitation, eating healthily, getting exercise. So he asked them, okay, where do you go when you need to see a doctor? They said, oh, we go to the surgery. Now, if you talk to people who live in the city, generally, and you talk about a surgery, you're talking about, someone who's going to cut you open. But that's not the case in the more rural areas. You'll often have the surgery, which is where the doctor and the nurse is. So we're still working on how to bridge that language divide, because that's not even covering the 12, 13 official languages in South Africa. That's just English being used in different ways. And I think it's a very interesting problem. I love problems because problems means there's an opportunity to find ways to make things better. But short answer, yes, definitely space and a big role for content writers because it's a very niche field and you need to have a lot of things to consider or take a lot of things into consideration.
All right. So a couple of questions from my side.
Yes.
So sorry, I might mispronounce your name. Alia Kuvadia at Discovery. I remember, I think that's how it's pronounced. I remember a talk by her at UX South Africa maybe 2 years ago, where she spoke about dentistry. I don't know if you know about that, or whether you know her.
Doesn't ring a bell.
So it's interesting. She kind of also looked at kind of like, but more in terms of, like the dynamics between the waiting room and, like kind of everything leading up to the actual procedure. So, for example, something like root canal or whatever, So like that as an actual like designing that experience and everything leading up to it. And and I think that was very interesting for me because like my dad has such a like he's so scared of dentists, like he's a pretty tough guy. Like I think maybe 2 years ago he passed kidney stones and like he went to the doctor and they were like, no, bro, the kidney stones are gone. Like you passed them, like already, like because he was like, yeah, I'm having this pain in my side and whatever. But like he literally faints when he goes to the dentist. And like so part of me like obviously thinks like there's probably something there in terms of how it's presented or framed to him. There's something cognitively happening there. It's not just like oh, he doesn't like pain or whatever. So I found that fascinating. And like there's just so much like baggage and ideas and ways that we think about dentists and so forth. I found, yeah. I definitely encourage you to check it out. There should be a recording, I think, online. Then the
I'll
other
definitely
question.
have a look.
Yes. Then the other question I have. So I have two other big questions. The second one is I found it fascinating how you kind of shared, like all these design methodologies and, like double diamond and all this stuff, and then your own one, and also like how it kind of fell apart and it didn't actually match the reality. And I'm curious what I would love for you to talk more about that more broadly in terms of like this tension between like taking a design process and methodology and kind of enforcing it on an existing process, and like actually having an existing process and having organically from all the things that shape that process develop something that's unique to that team, instead of being like, cool, this is what this is. Because this is something I find very often is like a team is like, cool, we're going to do design thinking proper now, whatever, and they follow it like dogmatically, but they've actually been able to figure out some kind of thing that's a bit more fuzzy amongst themselves because of the situation. And the fact is, like once again, like maybe one person only works half day and maybe the other person is remote or whatever. So do you think there's sometimes a danger in terms of just treating these processes as letter of the law?
Definitely. So the thing with design processes, design methodologies, design frameworks, the thing about them is it helps you to make sure that what the different steps are that you want to go through. So best laid plans of mice and men and all of that, they always fall apart. We know they always fall apart because you get halfway through the design phase and then the client's like, oh, wait, we forgot that we want to add this feature. And then you get right to the end and then compliance is like, oh, wait, we forgot that there's this legal thing. And then you have to go back to the beginning. And that's just life. That's how life works. That's how design works. That's how software development works. And we know this. And I think the important thing is to have an idea of what you want to do, but to acknowledge and accept that that's probably not what you're actually going to do. And for me, I like structure, like to an extreme sense. I like structure, I like plans, I like having things planned out. And a big part of doing postgrad research, my master's and my PhD, has been me becoming comfortable with ambiguity, because you have this plan of what you're going to do and what you want to research, and halfway through it all just falls apart. And not in a bad way, just the things you thought you were going to find ends up being different. And I love that. I love finding different things than what you thought you were going to. But it does mean that you have to accept that difficult feeling of not being in control. I think a lot of, like, I have OCD. I think a lot of designers are perfectionists, not necessarily to that degree, but with my OCD, it makes that I don't like things changing last minute. And it's part of what I've had to learn how to accept. And I think it's made me a much better designer for it. So I think it's a good idea to have an idea of everything you want to do. So what design thinking helps you to do is to remember there should be a phase where you do research. There should be a phase where you define what you want to do. There should be a phase where you iterate. These things are not necessarily going to be in that order, and it doesn't mean that you can't jump between them and do a little bit of that, a little bit of that. That's fine. But to have some sort of plan is a great starting point. And then just accept that you might need to throw the plan away. So what you said in terms of a team finding uniquely what works for them, I think that's fantastic. I don't think that every design framework is going to work for every design team, because you have different objectives, you have different people in the team, you have different skill sets. And if you find something that works for your team, then by all means go for it. I think it's more important to have something that you and your team feel comfortable with than sticking to something that someone at Stanford in America came up with and that worked for them 20 years ago. There's no guarantee that it's going to work for, a fintech company in South Africa in 2024. But it gives you a good guideline from where to start. So I don't think any of the design processes should be followed as law, quite frankly, because that's just not how life works. Life is not linear. Life is not in a vacuum. Life is not perfect. Sometimes, most of the time, you'll come up with this ideal user journey, and then the devs go, well, that's nice, but that's not possible in our tech stack. And, considering the legacy frameworks or legacy systems we have to work with, it's like, okay, back to the drawing board. It doesn't mean that you're not still going to have a fantastic solution. It just means that your solution that you created might not have been based in reality. And reality is flawed, and that's fine. But so something I wanted to mention that you said earlier about going to the dentist. I went to the dentist recently, and I just found it fascinating that once you lay down in the chair on the roof, she had signs on the roof of like inspirational quotes. And it was just such an interesting thing. I was like, that's actually so clever, because when you're in the chair, that's what you're looking at, the roof. And it's just that little hint of like improving the patient's experience. I found that so sweet, because a lot of people are nervous when going to the dentist, etc. So there's a designer called Doug Dietz. He created this project called the Adventure Series, and I highly encourage everyone to look it up. He has a TED talk that he did in 2013 about it. And it's just so beautiful. He is a product designer for General Electric, or he was at that point at least. And he designed MRI machines. So those of you who've seen an MRI machine, it's this giant white machine with like a ring. It's the thing that has this horrible whirring mechanical noise. And it's kind of intimidating and scary when you see it. So he tells the story of he had just finished designing this thing that had been produced, and they were busy installing it in a children's hospital somewhere in America. And he was standing there admiring his machine that he had just taken 2 years to design, like, marveling at the beauty of the lines and the things. And then a patient came in, a little girl with her parents, and the little girl was crying profusely. And her parents knelt down to her and they said, like, sweetie, we spoke about this. It's going to be okay. We just have to be brave, just have to get through this. And for the first time, he suddenly saw his machine through the eyes of a child. And it's this sterile white room with this giant, intimidating piece of machinery in it. And he's like, oh my, we have a problem. So they ended up workshopping with kids and with lots of other designers and people from different specialities, early childhood development psychologists, and they came up with what they called the adventure series. So they would design the MRI rooms in different ways. So one of them had an underwater theme, and the MRI machine was wrapped in a decal that looked like a submarine. And when you walked in, there was machines that sprayed like the scent of salt water, and the nurses and the radiographers were dressed up in sea captain outfits or whatever it might be, and they created this whole experience. And they also created special VR headsets that didn't have metal in them that the kids could wear so that they could feel that they were underwater watching fish while the machine was carrying on. And he said the thing that sort of made everything worth it was at one point when all of this was installed in a few different hospitals, he went to go and oversee it again. And afterwards, the kid turned to his parents and just said, when can we come again? Can I do that again? And it just made him feel that, wow, we actually achieved this. We made something that kids aren't scared of. Because, I mean, kids going for MRI scans, they're probably quite ill, and they're probably doing that a lot. So it was just such a beautiful story about him realizing the effect that he could have. So this is a thing that they rolled out in a bunch of different children's hospitals. I mean, even as an adult, I would love to go to that MRI machine rather than a regular one. But just this idea of actually thinking through the patient experience and the experience that people go through, because no one goes to the hospital when they're feeling fantastic and they're having a great day. When you're going there, you're already feeling ill, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling unhappy. Whether you're going to visit someone or whether you're the patient, you're not going there because you're happy. So, well, unless maybe someone had a baby, but that's a whole other story. But so just thinking through that whole experience, it can make such a difference in people's lives. So it's been quite an inspiring story to me. So thinking through how people experience interactions in healthcare, whether it's the doctors or the nurses or the patients. He also mentioned that one of the nurses came to him afterwards and said, for the first time in her life, she's actually enjoying her job, because usually she had to take the sick kids to the MRI machine, which they often had to sedate the patients because they were too upset. And by this, they had actual metrics by which they could measure how much less they had to sedate the kids, which made it more expensive, which made the procedures take longer, etc., etc. So it was literally a measurable ROI to improve these patient experiences. It's not just making kids feel better, it actually saved the hospital money, which tends to be, quite a big driving factor. So design can have a very measurable impact on people's lives beyond just creating a better experience.
Yeah, I feel you 100% on that. Like when I was I think 11 years old, 12 years old, I had bacterial meningitis. So yeah, I kind of lived inside those MRI machines for a year of my life. Yeah, and I just remember the noise. Just it is so, because it's a big magnet, if I'm not mistaken,
It is a
and
magnet.
the noise is just like the most horrible thing to this day that I've ever heard. Yeah, no, it's yeah. No, like even just like hospitals, talking about the user experience of hospitals in general. But yeah, Lisa, I think you wanted to ask a question.
No, I wanted to make a comment, but
Mm,
the MRI machines, they and I just know this from stories from my mom, but they have to be treated in a very specific way, even if they moved, because it is a magnet. So that thing will rip an earring out
yeah,
of your ear, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah.
So it's a very powerful, very, very expensive piece of equipment. But yeah, I kind of wanted to say, you tend to want to think about the patient's experience, but actually, the people who provide the care, if they have upset children day in and day out, what that takes from the person who has to give the care. So you kind of sometimes just have to flip your head around and think about the experience from multiple angles. I don't know if you've ever been to like people who provide cancer care, and these chemo chairs for patients to come and sit in.
Yeah.
And I've just through experience seen some wonderful like experiences being built for people who has to go and sit there under not the nicest circumstances.
And for a long
Um,
time. Mm,
yeah, and then some of them have really built up like a nice, almost like a community space. From the moment you put your foot in the door, it's just nice. And you also have to think about the hiring like of the right people to be there to meet the people. Um, and if you get people comfortable from the moment they put their foot in the door, the people who has to give the care also has a better experience, because the patients are
Definitely.
comfortable, and the patients they set up in a way that they are comfortable. I don't know, it just plays into so many things. Like you said, Liz, people generally, unless it's a baby being born, it's not it's not so nice.
No,
So
it's
there's
true.
a
And I
lot of
mean,
work
even that,
being
even that's not always great.
exactly. I mean, if you've just gone through labor or had a C-section, I mean, you're also not feeling fantastic. Like the family coming to visit you for the first time, they're probably feeling super happy, but mom is tired, dad is tired, everyone's exhausted.
exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of research about holistic wellness, and even just the fact that being positive about your treatment can have an effect. So if you think about cancer patients receiving chemo, it's not a nice experience, but if you can help them to feel positive and create this community of people and know that there are other people going through this with you, and we can get through this together, that positivity helps in order to endure the treatment. So that there's a lot that can help, instead of sitting in a sterile room staring at the wall. You can make it feel more comfortable and make it feel more homely. And like you say, I mean, healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurses, they get into this profession because they care. They want to help people. So that empathy fatigue, it's a real thing where they really want to help people, but if all they're seeing is everyone being sick and frustrated and annoyed the whole time, it becomes sometimes very difficult for them to give that empathy to the patients, if they're having a really bad day. And I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced, a healthcare practitioner being short with you, and it's not a nice feeling because you're not feeling well, and now this person's annoyed with you, maybe because they're having a super frustrating day, maybe because the pharmacist, their system is offline, so they're super frustrated because they can't help people in the way that they want to. now you feel that it's being taken out from you, and it has this whole cascading effect. So the more, it always comes back to having empathy for other people. And it's much easier said than done, but the more we can have empathy for other people and just remember and understand that everyone has an entire life going on outside of the tiny little microcosm in which you interact with them, whether it's at work, whether it's, the person ringing up your groceries. Everyone has an entire life outside of that one interaction. And just to have grace with each other for whatever that person might be going through. And now I'm getting very philosophical, but human-centered design is rooted in empathy, so I'm always going to advocate for that and just try and have that empathy for other people. Most of our interactions would be improved by that.
Can I ask you one last question? Sorry, Skulk.
No, go for it.
How did you collect your research? I know you mentioned you did interviews. Did you do anything in person?
Sadly, I was not able to. I did my interviews beginning of 2022. So I interviewed registrars at University of the Free State. I wasn't able to get permission to actually interview them in person on site because there were still COVID restrictions in place at that time. So I wasn't allowed inside the hospital as an outsider. So no, I wasn't able to interview them in person, but due to the wonders of Zoom and Teams, I was able to interview them after hours for the most part, or on their off days or so on. In an ideal world, I would have loved to actually observe them in their environment, because there are a lot of things people tell you they do certain things, but when you observe them, they sometimes do things either differently or in a different order or with different importance. They don't even realize because they're so used to that pattern. And the other thing I would have loved to do, but it was just asking way too much of them, would have been to ask them to actually keep a diary of the actions that they perform and how they feel during certain things, because we all go through a million interactions every day, and you might get frustrated at the smallest thing and it just slips your mind again. But if that same tiny little frustration happens 100 times in one day, for instance, you keep getting the wrong shortcut on a program, you don't think about it as a big thing when someone asks you about it. But if you see it written down, it's like, oh, I wrote down 100 times that this thing annoyed me today. Suddenly you realize maybe this is having a bigger effect than I thought. So there are a lot of those things that I would have loved to be able to include in my research methods, but I had to go with what would be the least intrusive in their days because they are incredibly busy, and also what I was able to do within the time constraints and physical constraints of a PhD that happened during COVID.
Yeah. So I see someone drop the big AI bomb in the question. So I would love to dig into that. So I'm going to try and be concise, but I do think so I would just love to touch a bit on. So you mentioned, the pharmacist says, oh, the system is down or whatever. And so my wife is actually in pharmacology, and she kind of works at a couple of hospitals. And man, the software they use, and this isn't state. This is private hospitals, and I don't know whether you can at all speak to kind of the role and the state of software in kind of the healthcare industry. I have some thoughts on that, but man, it sucks and it's really bad. And let me put it this way. The software that they are using, so if she's on call, the only way for her to know which other hospitals, let me tell a specific story. So there was a specific case where she was on call, and someone, so because of her degree, she's the only person who's allowed to handle specific things that are technically illegal, but obviously hospitals get provision to be able to stock it and so forth. Like fun fact, like hospitals actually have a crap ton of like cocaine and lots of other things. So, but so someone had, I think, arsenic poisoning, and she had to go in to kind of give the doctors and so forth access to whatever they needed, but she wasn't sure whether they even had it in stock. And if they didn't have it in stock, then they had to contact the hospitals nearby to kind of see if they can. But the only way for her to know if they have it in stock was to actually drive through to the hospital and boot up the computer there and access it there. And to me, that felt like how in 2024 is there no way for her to remotely be able to say whether they have this thing in stock or not, and if they don't, they should start like querying other hospitals to see if they can get it. And and I've spoken to a lot of people specifically in this world as well, so there's several reasons why the software is this awful. Like the one is just like it's just like one of those things where the can has been kicked down the road, and at this point it's just so expensive upgrading it. And the other thing is as well is like there's a bit of a Dead Sea effect here, where because there's so much red tape, there's so much bureaucracy, like the really good software developers just are like, I don't, why would I put myself through this? I'm gonna go work in fintech, or in like build some blockchain thing or whatever. So yeah, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on the role that actual software plays in terms of the general experience, and what are some. Where do you think it's going? Do you think it's just going to get so bad that we're just going to have to say like we can't manage like literally the life and death scenarios of people with this? We need to make a plan. Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So there are actually several questions in there, so
Oh,
I'll try and
geez,
get
yeah.
to them one
Tell
by
me
one.
about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are so many different kinds of software in the healthcare space. So, if we talk about the pharmacy software, the terrible one you're probably talking about is that blue screen with like white text on it that looks like MS-DOS.
I always say it looks like Norton Commander. I don't know if any of you guys are old enough to know Norton. That was before Windows. Yeah. Like
Yeah, no,
how that
it
was the
still looks
closest
like
we had to a UI. Yeah.
That's
you
the
know,
one
it
where
looks like it's still running on DOS. Yes.
yeah,
Sorry,
they
Liesl?
tab a lot. They tab a lot. You can
Yes.
see the pharmacist, their hands knows the keyboard really well, and the amount of times they have to tab. You could just tell.
So the interesting thing is I'm actually at the moment busy designing like a digital script solution, and I was talking to a lady that works with me who is a pharmacist to understand how I should design this so that the pharmacists can interpret it in the best way, because I can make it all nice and pretty. That doesn't mean that's the way that they want to receive their information in, or the format that they want to receive the information in. So she actually sent me a few screenshots from that program, I don't know what it's called, about the order that questions are asked in and what format they ask things in. And I had this whole discussion with someone the other day exactly about that. And Skulk, to your point about whether it's worth upgrading the software or whether we should or whether we can, a lot of it I think comes down to adoption and change. So like you said, Liesl, the pharmacists know exactly, I press here, tab 5 times, enter something, enter 6 times, press F whatever, and then I'm done. They know that system by heart. It's not pretty. Whether it's user-friendly is debatable, but it works. For them, the most important thing is speed. They don't care if they have a pretty button with a drop shadow. So it's actually, I haven't actually had a conversation with a pharmacist about, how well the system works for them or not. I think it's a matter of they don't know anything else. It's what they're trained on. They can use that program in their sleep. So just because it might not be the prettiest thing, it doesn't mean that it's not the best solution for them. So the big thing that comes in is if we were to redesign a state-of-the-art, works like a dream alternative to this, what would the cost of adoption be? Because you're asking pharmacists to now say said, okay, we're going to implement this in all of the pharmacies in South Africa. Now you're asking all the pharmacists, or even just one pharmacy, you're asking them to first of all go for training on highly specialized software. Because remember, this is not made for the general public. When we design for the general public, we design, you'll think about material design, or you'll think about, the what does Apple call their guidelines, human-centered or human computer, whatever. You follow the sort of set standard that apps use and websites use. But when it comes to highly specialized software, you have highly specialized practitioners. So it needs to be a lot more complex. They don't care about breaking information up into 6 screens. They want to see all of the information in one screen at the same time. They care about efficiency. So what is the cost going to be to send them on training? And cost, I mean time, because their time is precious. No one likes to wait in a pharmacy queue. So now you have to send them on training. Now you have to implement that system onto their new computers. Now you have to wait for them to get comfortable helping patients. In that time, is this patient going to decide, the queues at this pharmacy is now way too long, I'm going to go to a different branch going forward? So there's all sorts of these kinds of like business risks that you have to start considering. And is that new software actually going to be better? And how much? Is the loss of income that you're going to have by forcing people to change onto a new system that might be slightly more efficient, is it going to make up for the amount that you're going to lose in terms of people that get frustrated with the pharmacist taking longer, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a very big question around that I can't answer. I haven't done any research on that, but those are sort of the major issues that I foresee with it, is the cost of adoption and the cost that the company is going to have to endure to take on new software, and how much that's actually going to save them in the long run. So like I said, for them, the big thing is efficiency. They just want to get this done. As long as that software is doing its job, they don't actually care what it looks like. I'm sure they'd love it to be prettier, but to what end?
I agree with you 100%. Like if you meet somebody, or people who likes to have a glass of wine, and they meet somebody who doesn't drink wine, it bothers the people who drink wine more than it bothers the person who's not drinking wine, It's the same as like, I know that system bothers so many people, but I also feel like there's a reason why it hasn't changed yet. But you're gonna have to fundamentally change the way that the operations work, because the other thing that we don't have is like, if you've lived in Belleville and Pretoria, and there's no way to consolidate the medications you've taken in your life.
Oh no!
So that's owned by that pharmacy and that pharmacy and that pharmacy, and maybe the doctors still have the paperwork. You certainly don't. So it's also that we shouldn't go too deep, because we're not going to be able to get out of it. But it's that you're not being able to own certain things about your health from born. If you could do something where the script doesn't even go through you, the script is issued to the pharmacy that you're going to go to, and it's a whole digital process, and they could almost dispense before you even get there. There's a world in which
so that actually brings in an interesting point in terms of people misusing scripts. I've seen multiple examples where people will go and shop with their script, and they'll go to 6 different pharmacies and get their script filled 6 times, and then lots
there's
of problems.
No way of checking that. Yeah.
So there are some ways that people are starting to do it. Some doctors will only send scripts directly to the pharmacy. We are working on a solution where you send it to a specific database. It can only be fetched once by the pharmacy. That way the doctor can be sure that you're not going to go shop around with that script. E-signatures, all sorts of things like that, to digitally encrypt it, to try and make things safer. So there are ways that technology can help us to try and prevent abuse of scripts. So there's definitely a technological aspect there that I think is definitely going to help us. But you're also touching on something that Skulk mentioned earlier, which is not being able to have a holistic view of a patient. Skulk, you mentioned it in terms of seeing the medication at the different hospitals. That's a massive problem in South Africa, and there have been so many projects that have attempted to bridge that. And I know there are 2 or 3 projects like that running, where they're trying to get a national patient registry. I'm probably using the wrong wording for this, but that is the concept of it, where if you go to a government hospital, if I go to, now I can't think of a single one, but if you go to a government hospital in Pretoria, if you go to Cape Town, that your records will be available there as well. At the moment, that's not necessarily the case. Which is very problematic, because you have one patient and suddenly you have to redo their whole history. If you have to redo all their scans, etc., it's costing more. There are projects in place where people are trying to solve these issues, which is really great. And we're slowly moving towards a solution, but it's difficult because all the hospitals are running on different versions of different programs and different systems. It's not necessarily possible to link all of them without a lot of investments into infrastructure. And I mean, obviously, none of the private hospitals share information with each other, the different companies. So that's also hard. So there are companies, it's something we want to do sometime in the future, is working on a patient index where you are actually the owner of your own medical data, so that if you go and do x-rays, they're attached to your profile as opposed to, the doctor's office. And it's not easy because, again, all the systems work on different things, but as a person, you should be able to have all of your medical records and not have to phone 7 different hospitals and 7 different doctors in order to get all your previous blood draws and all your previous x-rays, etc. But it's going to take a long time, because this is such complex information, and there are so many restrictions around sharing patients' information. I mean, when I had the biopsy done for my thyroid, they weren't willing to give me the results. They only sent it to the doctor, because understandably, you need to speak to the doctor, and the doctor needs to then interpret the results and tell you, okay, the biopsy is inconclusive, it means X, Y, and Z. So I spoke to the doctor, and I'm like, cool. Then afterwards, I went back to the lab, and I'm like, okay, can I just have the actual pathology result? And they said no. I told them, but it's my result. I'm the patient. I understand why the doctor needed to interpret it for me first. He's done that. They weren't willing to release my own records to me. So I convinced them to phone the doctor so that the doctor could tell them to please release my records to me. So, yeah, I mean, if they're not even willing to give the patient their own records, they definitely don't want to give other doctors' offices records. But yes. So lastly, I know we're running way over time, but lastly, I just want to jump onto the big AI question. Yes. Oh, interesting. That's not actually what I thought the question was going to be, but I'll answer this one first. At the moment, no, I haven't used any AI in terms of doing designs. I've seen some really cool programs. I think Galileo is one of the ones that you can use to input text inputs, and then it will give you AI generated UI designs. I saw that Figma just released a really interesting one where you can, in FigJam, just write on sticky notes what your user journey should be, and then it will create UI designs for you. I think that's a really interesting way to generate ideas. I know right after Figma released that feature a few months ago, there was immediately a big backlash where someone asked it to design a weather app, and it designed exactly Apple's weather app for it. So you could very clearly see what it had been trained on. So when it comes to generative AI, I think there's a lot of risk where if you don't know the data set that it was trained on, there's the saying of garbage in, garbage out. Not saying Apple's weather app is garbage. I'm just saying if you don't know where it's getting its information from, you don't know whether to trust it. So with regards to that, just don't trust AI blindly. You'll see that every single generative AI model, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, or Figma, all of them have a disclaimer that says AI makes mistakes, double check. And this is because they hallucinate, they can make things up that literally don't exist. So I've seen people try and submit these things for like projects, for university projects, without double checking their work. It can be quite hilarious. Don't blindly trust AI. Use it as a tool as you would any other tool, and use it as inspiration, use it as guidelines, but always go back and check what is your actual design principles. What are the ways that, go and do research. What are ways that things can be done and should be done, and follow that. Use the AI as an inspiration and then build from there. So I think AI has a lot of potential, and I think it has some really exciting prospects, but it's a tool like any other. And I don't think trying to use it to replace designers is going to be a thing anytime soon, because it needs to, in order to get the right result, you need to input the right question. And that's where we come in. So I think, hello. I think the way that we design might be changing in the next few years, where there's a lot of change going to be that we're going to potentially, and software developers as well, learn how to write the correct prompts to understand the results that you're getting and making sure that you're getting decent results. But again, it's a matter of you need to give it the right questions in order to get the right outputs from it. So where I thought your question was actually going to be was in terms of AI and radiology, which is a whole other thing.
Oh yeah, I didn't think of that. That is like, I've seen some amazing stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some really cool things, and I did ask the radiologists about that when I interviewed them, and the main thing is that they said it's a really interesting tool. They don't trust it at all. They think it's very interesting, and they'll use it to sort of get a baseline. But the big thing to remember is all of those AIs are trained in the West, in America, and in Europe. It's not looking or trained on the nuances of South Africa or even Africa. So, for instance, we get a lot of cases of tuberculosis in South Africa. That's not something that their models are necessarily trained on. So I'm speaking under correction, but it might completely misinterpret a tuberculosis diagnosis because it's not trained on enough data. People in sub-Saharan Africa also get different kinds of diseases than people in America or in Europe do, again, which their models are not trained on. So I think that, again, AI is a very interesting tool, but relying on it blindly is something that we should be very, very wary of.
I think there's also an interesting aspect there, like as you said it now. So obviously I've seen some of the stuff where it's able to, and, just for framing, like AI is kind of like this broad umbrella thing, but like in this case we're specifically talking about like machine learning on massive data sets, not like language models. So the problem with something like that is that it's inherently a black box. So you train it against like specific data sets, and then you train it against a control, and it can generally give you a likelihood of, okay, this is 10% to be TB or malignant or whatever. This is 60%, 90%, whatever. It can give you an estimation of the likelihood, but beyond that, it can't really tell you why. And it doesn't really have any sense of why. And and this is the inherent problem with things like neural networks and so forth. There's like, you can't open up the hood and look how it calculated it, because the calculation can't be expressed, the internal logic can't be expressed in a form that we as humans can understand. So yeah, I guess that's a big problem. Like if you're going to rely on these tools, it's going to be like, oh, the computer says you have TB. I can't tell you why.
Exactly.
I don't think
and
it
that's
even
not good
knows
enough.
why. Yeah, but it thinks you have TB, so do with that what you want. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the AI thing, like my personal take on it is, AI is amazing at generating artifacts. So it depends on what your process is like. If your process is very artifact heavy, then it's going to add a lot of value. It's also good churn out wireframes, user personas. Here, 50 PDFs of user personas. But if your process is much more, what would be the word, kind of cross-functional and kind of in workshopping in teams and stuff, and you don't really produce artifacts to hand over, it's not really going to be that helpful, because like design happens in the decisions that you make, not in terms of how you represent those decisions. So yeah, I guess and it's the same with coding as well. I generally find like AI, there's a I think a misunderstanding of what is the hard part about programming or design. Yeah. And
Yes.
like and the misunderstanding is that actually writing the code is the hard part. Like figuring out how to, like, the hard part is thinking about all the aspects and figuring out kind of how everything,
The
like,
nuances.
it's like, I often say to my students, you spend the majority of your time talking about code and reading code, and very little time actually writing code. And AI is amazing for writing code, but that's just a small part of the picture. But then you already know how you're going to solve it. And I guess it's the same with design. Like by the point where you have enough to prompt the AI to give you specific wireframes, most of the design proper has actually already been done. It's just a way to represent those decisions that were made. So I don't know.
No, I agree completely.
Yeah.
I cannot agree with you more. You've done
Yeah.
the thinking. It's just expediting a small part of it for you.
Yes, but I do think there's also a problem there in design education, insofar that I think we also overemphasize artifacts, and we underemphasize kind of the decision-making process. So like, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's interesting. I do think that I follow John Madia quite closely. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his surname, Media, I don't know. But I follow him quite closely, and he kind of does some interesting writing. He's actually been writing about kind of the fact that like how like interaction design and kind of what we consider user UX design. It's kind of like a bit of like, we're kind of very early in the story still, and like we're kind of at that place where, in the early days of TV or whatever, they just took what they did with radio and just completely took it and transposed it onto TV. So you'd have someone narrating like, oh, the man is running to the door, the man is getting in the car, because like that's just like what they knew, and they just like superimposed what they knew from radio onto TV without realizing the medium's kind of inherent properties, in terms of, you could actually show that without doing radio with pictures. And I do think like in terms of interaction design and so forth, we're still very much in that phase where we're just like superimposing a lot of ideas from other disciplines, specifically graphic design and so forth, onto this process without realizing that like it's actually not even a really good fit. But yeah, like I have some thoughts. I can do my own FEDSA talk on that. I'm not going to hijack yours to talk about it. But yeah, I guess we should probably start thinking about ending off. Liesel, I don't know if there's any other questions from your side. I don't know if anyone wants to ask any other questions in the text chat. Liz, I don't know if there's anything you maybe want to touch on before we start ending off.
No, I think we covered everything that I desperately wanted to get off my heart. So thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks so much for this conversation afterwards. I always love hearing other people's views and what they wonder about, what they think about. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for doing it. I don't have any more questions. There's a lot of the topics that we touched on, which I feel like I could talk about for hours, but I don't.
Same.
I just feel like we need to cut it. Otherwise, we're not going to cut it. But I'm super thankful for the talk, Liz. It's just a great reminder of how we think and how we should stop thinking, and we should empathize and think a little bit how other people feel in the moment, and what they're going through, and that we're all human beings at the end of the day. I was in a chat today with somebody where I just had to remind her that these are all processes and things, but at the end of the day, we're human beings interacting with each other, and we're not about to let go of that part of it. So thank you, Skalk, for joining, and his cute little daughter.
Eating McDonald's. On
screen.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
On screen.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah, like, and Liz, if people want to reach out to you, what would be the best way?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. Yeah, go and find me there. I'm Liz Spangenberg. Probably spend way too much time on there, so you can add me, message me there. I'll definitely get back to you. Love having conversations about design and about healthcare and about anything like that. So yeah, pop me a message if you're interested.
All right. Yeah, you have the same thing that I do. You have a very Afrikaans name and surname. So maybe not the Liz part, but so it's very easy to find you because there's not a lot of us in the tech industry. People with very Afrikaans names. Yeah.
Well, I'm lucky in that sense. My name and surname is unique enough that you only find me, and all the many talks I've done and things I've written, if you Google me. So yes, and if you want to find my TED talk, it's mostly the content that I spoke about today, but today was the extended version of that. Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. Say bye, Liefie.
Bye.
Say bye. Bye. Bye.